Welcome, everyone. Thanks, Emily, for your support throughout the past several weeks. It is my deep pleasure, great pleasure to welcome Dean Mauro Guillen to the room virtually. I'm so enjoying your book, I have to say, but let me do a proper introduction. Of course, my screen is gone, and I had it all ready to go. Yes, the newly appointed Dean at Cambridge Judge Business School. He's a keynote speaker, as you can see today, and a former Zaman Professor of International Management at the Wharton School, former Guggenheim and Fulbright Fellow, author of 10 books and over 40 scholarly articles. He appears frequently on NPR, Bloomberg TV, China News, CNN Espanol, and other broadcast media, author of a monthly op-ed column for the Korean Times, and of course, consulting engagements and collaborations in corporations around the world, Accenture, PricewaterhouseCoopers, RAND, AFL lectures, the list goes on. That's not going to cover all of his accomplishments. I emailed Mauro and I was shocked by his grace. Honestly, who am I? And I emailed him and he said, of course, I would like to talk to you about your project. And then after he heard about it, he said, of course, I would love to talk about my book. And then I said, if I buy your books, will you sign them? And he said, of course, I would be happy to come to your house and sign 80 books. He signed 80 books for us, everybody, which is amazing. I just thought, wow, what a nice guy who teaches at Wharton. And then I watched over the summer as he shot to the top of the bestseller list and became a dean at Cambridge. And I thought, wow, that was really a lucky email that I sent. So, lesson for the entrepreneurs and innovators out there: you can't lose anything by emailing that superstar that you're gawking at. Just send the email and the worst that can happen is nothing. But sometimes great things happen. So thank you, Mauro. I'll kick it over to you. I'm really looking forward to hearing you speak tonight. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you so much, Anne. I hope that you can hear me okay. Let me know if that is not the case. And look, it's funny that you mentioned that I always say yes, because I'm sure you know that actually the job of the dean is oftentimes to say no to many requests, especially those coming from faculty and students. So I'm very happy to do this. And the reason is very simple, which is I'm from Spain originally. I think you can tell that I have an accent, but I've lived in Philadelphia for 25 years. Both of my daughters were born in the city and they grew up in the city. And my wife and I have, enjoyed these 25 years, very, very much. And we feel very much into that because Philadelphia has so much to especially to a young couple like we were 25 years ago. And, the city really is a wonderful place in which to come and live and work and have fun and also raise a family. And so if any, association that like yours or organization that is trying to essentially make Philadelphia even more competitive, even a far better place than it already is, I think, it is my duty to essentially, do whatever I'm asked to do. And it is certainly a pleasure for me today to spend about 15 minutes, I think, Anne, we agreed, so that it fits into your program, about, what the future may bring and how a city such as ours and the companies that operate in the city and the workers and the employees who live in the city, work for these companies, how we should be preparing for what's coming. Because I believe that what's coming the next 10 years is a fundamental transformation of pretty much everything in the world. And let me explain why. Well, first of all, because we are now in the next few years going to see the full effects of some demographic changes that have been going on around the world, but certainly here in the United States and in Philadelphia for the last 50 years or so. And those changes essentially have to do with two very basic things. One is that the number of babies continues to drop, as you know, and that is mainly driven by the access that women now have in many parts of the world to education, which essentially means that then they have opportunities available to them that their mothers or their grandmothers couldn't even dream about. And the fact that now more and more women in more and more different parts of the world, graduate from high school, half of them go to then college, and then they pursue a career, essentially means that they postpone having their first baby. And as they postpone having their first baby, on average in the United States to age 28 or 29, then obviously the number of babies drops and drops. So that's one very important change, because it will have a large impact on the size of the younger age cohorts entering school, but it also has a large impact in terms of the importance in the future of the population above age 60 or so. And I'm going to return to that in a moment. The other big change from a demographic point of view is life expectancy. So the number of years that on average we live. And as you know, the good news is that those of us now in this virtual room will probably live on average about 5 or 6 years longer than our parents, and up to perhaps 11 years longer than our grandparents. And that makes a big difference. It makes a huge difference. When you put together these two changes, of course, we see that they are taking place at different rates and speeds in different parts of the world. But specifically thinking about the United States, thinking about Philadelphia, these changes have been going on for a while. And what it means is essentially that every year that passes, the number of young people entering school is smaller and smaller, and the number, as I said earlier, of people above the age of 60, 70, 80 gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So consumer markets will change as a result of that. Financial markets will change because the makeup of the population is going to change quite quickly. Now, the other big change, and it's something that I think is being felt in Philadelphia, but more importantly, is being felt nationally in the United States, and of course in a few other countries around the world as well, is the impact that minority populations, what we call minority populations, and immigration is having. And as you know, minority groups and immigrants tend to have bigger families. They tend to have more children. And therefore, for the United States as a whole, something very important that is going to happen between now and the year 2030. By the year 2030, more than half of young people in the United States below the age of 35 are going to be what today we call minority groups. So Latinx, African Americans, Asian Americans, and so on. And that's really important, right? Because look, and this is of course particularly the case in Philadelphia, which is a city that is far more diverse from an ethnic and a racial point of view than the United States as a whole, as a country. And this is important for the following reason, which is, let me just give you 4 facts here. One is that members of these groups tend to marry at an earlier age on average. Number 2 is that adjusting for purchasing power, they're more likely to purchase a home, to purchase a car, and also to use digital platforms. Once again, adjusting for purchasing power. So in other words, to the extent that we have a more diverse population, and that's particularly the case, of course, in the greater Philadelphia area, but it is increasingly the case as well in the United States as a whole, we're going to see fundamental changes that are going to, in turn, have implications for markets, I think for society, for politics, for all sorts of things. So that's on the demographic front. On the second type of trend that I want to bring to your attention is of an economic nature. And, we can talk about many different kinds of economic trends that are going on in the world, but I think the most fundamental one is that within the next 10 years or so, the United States will no longer be the largest consumer market in the world. China will become the largest market. And shortly thereafter, maybe 20 years from now, India will become the biggest consumer market in the world. And the reason why India will become bigger than China as a consumer market, not as an economy, but as a consumer market, is essentially that, in India, you have now more babies, and therefore they have a younger population, and therefore consumption is going to be higher in India than it will be in China in about 20 years from now. So what is the implication of this for people living in Philadelphia? Well, the global market and the center of gravity of the global economy is shifting away from Europe and North America, meaning from the Atlantic, towards Asia. And this is going to have important implications, I think. It's going to have important implications because we're going to have to pay more attention to those markets. And whether we want it or not, companies and brands are going to start paying more attention to them. You see, for the last 100 years or so, every important product, everything that we have in our home was designed, was launched by a company with the American or perhaps the European, but mostly the American consumer in mind. And that's about to change, right? I mean, this has been a constant for 100 years, but it's now about to change, that the Asian consumer is going to become more important. So we need to get ready for that as well. We need to realize that things are changing and that the center of attention in the global economy is shifting towards that part of the world. And then the third thing is technology. And there's nothing I can say that I think will probably add to your sense that we are increasingly using technology, that the pandemic has only accelerated that trend. Out of necessity, we're now using technology for working, for studying, for meetings like this one, for learning, as well as for entertaining ourselves and for shopping, of course. So technology is going to change a lot of things, but let me just illustrate how all of these trends will converge to produce a very different situation. And that's the whole point of the book that Anne mentioned, right? The point of the book is not to examine trends individually or in isolation, but rather to think about how they come together. So it's really important then to connect the dots across those trends. It's very important to, as I argue in the book, to think laterally. So let me offer you two examples of this. The first example is, or has to do with the way in which, for the last 150 years or so, we have organized our lives, which is according to a sequential model. So when we were very little, we would just play. And then we would go to school for about 10 years or 15 years, maybe 20 years, depending on the degrees that we were pursuing. Then after that, we would work for maybe 30 years or 40 years. And then finally, we would go into retirement. So that's the way in which, for the last 150 years, beginning in Europe, then in the United States, in other parts of the world, we have been organizing our lives. But now things are changing, right? And I want you to consider three trends and to think about how they come together to produce I think, a phenomenal transformation in this respect. So the first trend is, as I mentioned earlier, that we're living longer. So a 60-year-old in the United States today can expect to live on average another 24 years. Now, 24 years beyond age 60, that's another lifetime. So today, as we speak, there's about 12,000 people in the United States celebrating their 60th birthday. And once again, on average, they can expect to live another 24 years. That's the first trend that I want you to consider. The second one is that not only we're living longer, but we're also staying in good physical and mental shape for a greater number of years. So in other words, somebody today who celebrates his or her or their 60th birthday is in much better shape physically and mentally on average than somebody who celebrated that same birthday 20 or 50 years ago. Okay, so this is also really important. So not only the lifespan has increased, but also the so-called health span has increased. Okay, and then the third important change that I want you to consider in conjunction with the other two is that one of the most important and unfortunately negative effects of technological change is that it makes knowledge obsolete or antiquated much faster than in the past. So if you put all of those things together, then this is my forecast as to what we're going to see happening over the next 10 years in Philadelphia, in the United States, and in many other parts of the world, which is that people are going to go back to school several times. Now, why do I say that? Well, people are going to first go to school in their teenage years, and then maybe go to college, and then they will work. And by the time they are 40 years old, they will realize that much of what they learned at school 20 years earlier has become obsolete because of technological change. And so they will decide to go back to school to remain competitive in the labor market. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that people will go back and check into a dorm at a college campus, not necessarily. What I'm saying is that people will go back to learn full time for a year or for two, maybe using a digital platform, such as the one that we're using now. And then they will work for another 20 years. And when they celebrate their 60th birthday, they're going to realize two things. First is that they still have another 24 years ahead of them on average. And that's an awfully long time. And that maybe they haven't been able to save enough for 24 years worth of retirement. And the second thing that they will realize is that all of that they learned when they went back to school at age 40, perhaps much of it has become obsolete yet again. So I think that at age 60 or around age 60, a lot of people will go back to school again, right? Now, here's an even bolder scenario for us to consider. If people go back to school full-time several times, not just once during their lifetime, then there's nothing preventing them from pursuing a different profession, a different occupation, a different career each time that they go back to school. Look, this is already happening, but it's only about 1% or maybe 2% of the American population that is doing this, going back to school every 20 years or so. It's still a very small percentage of people. But I think in the next few years, we're going to see a dramatic increase in that, especially because of technological change. Okay, so that's one scenario, one thing that I want you to consider. And maybe, Anne, if we have time for Q&A, maybe we can discuss that further. Now, why is that thinking about that important? I think it's very important to think about that because it's not just individuals who need to adjust to that new way of organizing our lives. It's also companies, organizations, the government. And I also believe that cities like Philadelphia will also need to take that into account because that's going to change not just the experience of people and how they live their lives. I think it's going to fundamentally transform the economy if we actually shift towards that other way of organizing our lives. So that's the first example that I wanted to show you. The second example involves what else? Remote work. So many of us, not all of us, but many of us, about 50% of the American workforce has experienced remote work over the last 18 months. And it's been a big experiment. I think both individuals and companies have learned over the last 18 months about the advantages and also the disadvantages of remote work. And I personally believe, based on the evidence so far, that in the near future, we are going to be somewhere in between. I think what we're going to see is hybrid work arrangements, blended work arrangements that combine work at the office with work from home. But if that happens, there's also the possibility that some employees of companies will still be 100% remote. And if that's the case, then there's nothing preventing companies from hiring workers all over the world without asking them to move. So in other words, you could see a situation in which a company, let's say in Singapore, looks for another marketing expert for their team, and they advertise and they find the ideal candidate in Philadelphia. And they tell that person, look, you don't have to move to Singapore. You can work for our company, but on a remote basis. Okay? So I think as a result of this, what we may see for the first time in history is a truly global market for talent emerging in the world. And this is going to have some, really positive consequences, but also some negative ones. I think companies, for the most part, will benefit from this because they will have access to a larger pool of talent. I think a large proportion of workers will also benefit. Those would be workers who have differentiated skills that are very valuable, that companies all over the world will be searching for. But there's also going to be a lot of workers who lack those differentiated skills, and they're going to be displaced by this trend because companies may find somebody to replace them who can work on a remote basis, who has the same skills or even better skills, but is willing to work for a lower wage. So we need to prepare for this. I think Philadelphia needs to prepare for this. by doing two things. First is making sure that nobody's left behind. We need to make sure that the human resources that we have in the city are prepared for this new technological wave that is coming. We need to redouble our efforts at training and providing opportunities for professional growth and occupational growth. But there's another thing that I think a city like Philadelphia, which I mentioned at the beginning, I think is a very livable place. It's a very attractive place in which to live, which is to try to persuade people to come and live in the city or in its greater metro area and work remotely from here. Why not? I mean, the city has a lot to offer in terms of entertainment, great schools, wonderful, parks and great housing stock, proximity to both New York and Washington, but at a much lower cost of living. So there's many things going in favor of Philadelphia. We should have as a city a strategy for attracting remote workers who would like to, start a family here in the city. And at the same time, work for a company or an organization that is located somewhere else in the United States or somewhere else in the world. Unless we prepare for that, I think other locations will essentially take advantage. Look, my overall message is, I think, relatively straightforward, right? I think over the next 10 years, we're going to see so to speak, the culmination of a lot of changes. I mean, some of these changes have been going on for 50 years or more. But I think it's only going to be in the next 10 years or so that we're going to see with our own eyes the full implications of this. Because we're going through a great transformation, driven, as I said, by the combination of three very different kinds of trends that are mutually reinforcing each other. So population trends, economic trends, and technological trends. And unless we first examine how they're going to change the situation in combination, those three trends, and then we come up with some, strategy for dealing with those changes, I think it's going to be very difficult to adapt. And I think that strategy needs to be developed by individuals, by families, by communities, by companies and organizations, and in addition, by cities, of course, by countries as well. So that was the message that I wanted to convey to you today. And thank you once again so much for inviting me to say a few words at your gathering here. And back to you, Anne. And again, as you know, I will never say no.
Somebody would stay for a few questions. Is Rebecca? I thought my mic. Yes, my mic is on. Mauro, can you hear me? Are you still able to stick around?
I can hear you.
Questions? Okay, great. I just had one question about the three trends, and I loved your book, I want to say, and I was really happy to see that it was very, the chapter about the cities being on the front lines of both the wealth gap and climate change that sort of complicate the management of these trends. I wanted you to talk a little bit about, based on your perch, perhaps there's some cities that are managing this or talking about this globally, some metro areas that are already thinking about the humanity of the transformation we're about to go through, both on the demographics, whether they're managing their aging population well or attracting diversity the way that Philadelphia has, we've done that in the past. Or managing the technological change. Is there any metro areas in your studies that you could talk about that are at the forefront of managing a response?
Well, I believe that probably the best example in the United States is one that I write about in the book, which is Chattanooga, Tennessee. So this is a city much smaller than Philadelphia, but still a city that used to be a big manufacturing hub. And like, other cities that once had a vibrant manufacturing industry, they started to decline in the 1960s and the 1970s. And they essentially decided to do three things, I think. One was to very quickly try to, turn the downtown area into a vibrant park and city. Now, we already have that in Philadelphia, right? We don't need to do that. We already have a vibrant downtown. I mean, what we need is perhaps to spread the wealth through the other areas or parts of the city. But the second thing that they did was they set up for free for every company, for every individual, a really high-speed internet service in the city, okay? And so much so that you can't imagine how many startups decided to set up shop in Chattanooga, Tennessee, to take advantage of that big, infrastructure project there, right? And then the third thing that they did was to encourage immigration from the United States and from abroad, right? Talent, right? People who would be willing to work and work hard and take advantage of the city. And it is, over the last 20 years or so, one of the fastest growing cities in terms of economic activity, or metro areas in terms of economic activity in the United States. So I would point that to that example. There are several others in the book. I think, in other words, there is hope. I mean, it is possible in the United States to make a city come back, return to prosperity. It is certainly possible.
Thank you. I wanted to open the room for questions and open the chat if there's any questions in the chat, or if there's any questions for Mauro in the room. Sir in the purple, I can't read your name, I'm sorry.
Yes. Thank you. Mauro, thank you for the presentation, and I'll make sure to pick up a copy of the book. Very interested. One question is about transportation, getting these people from place to place. You mentioned also environment, but also in Philadelphia, you have a large population of poverty. And how do you address that while bringing new people into the city and deal with the conflict of getting those people to work also? And the other thing you mentioned was as somebody going to college, a lot of those folks in poverty aren't getting to college, so they're not getting to 40 to getting to college again, or to 60 and thinking they need more continuing education. So what do we do with that population and help them in that process?
Thanks for your question.
Yeah, that's a great question. And yes, above everything else, you have to avoid gentrification, right? You have to avoid this duality that sometimes emerges between people who are coming in with high levels of education, they have good jobs, and then the locals who lost their jobs and they don't have as much education and they're finding it very difficult to escape the cycle of poverty. So I think it's really important to have a strategy for attracting companies that will create jobs that are both high skill and medium skill or low skill, right? I think it's extremely important to keep that in mind, because if you only bring in jobs or companies that create jobs that are highly paying for highly educated workers and all of that, then as you say, inevitably, you're going to create two classes of residents in the city. And that's not good. That's not good for so many reasons. And in a way, that's what I think has happened in some parts of Philadelphia, right? I mean, Philadelphia, we have some of the highest paid jobs and occupations in the country. And at the same time, we have so many other people who struggle to even find a job at a very low wage. So that's also something that has to be part of the strategy. And again, I hope that we don't make the mistake in the next 10 years that we made in the last 20 years, which is to leave people behind, right? Because then you know what happens. What happens is that poverty increases, social problems increase, and most importantly, also political polarization increases, right? People start getting desperate and they start voting for, fringe candidates and so on and so forth. We've seen that both in Europe and the United States, and I think it's something really important to avoid in the future.
Thank you, Mauro. I don't want to neglect Zoom land, so let's take one last question from the chat. I apologize to everyone in the group who still have questions, but we're on a timeline, and I don't want to neglect the virtual crowd. So Emily, did you pick one from the chat for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So you have a question of this tomorrow. How important do you think education will be in the truly global economy, and who do you think is leading that competition?
Yeah, I want to add to that question. You know, I'm curious what you think, coming from the university, how vulnerable traditional education institutions are to this. I agree, people are going to have lifelong learning. I'm not sure where they'll go for that. And I'm curious your thoughts. And I you know, coming from.
No, I think education is really important because we are in a knowledge economy, and we will be for a very long time to come. But I don't think education should be confused with college or university, right? You know, my feeling is that in Philadelphia, after having lived there for 25 years, some of the most pressing needs are actually in primary and secondary education, right? I mean, we've forgotten a little bit about those levels of education. And we have made, of course, great investments in higher education in the city, and the universities are doing really, really well. Penn, Temple, Drexel, and so on and so forth. So I think, you know, the economy needs people with different kinds of skills and different kinds of education. And as you said, it's really important also to offer lifelong learning and educational opportunities, not just for the most highly skilled people, but for everyone, right? Really, really, really important to do that. And by the way, if I may, there's also a question in the chat about the wage tax, right? Which I guess we all pay in the city. And look, I think it is important for a city like Philadelphia to raise revenue in order to essentially provide services. And, you know, the debate, I think, should be not so much about whether we need a wage tax or not, but what should be the level of that wage tax, right? What percentage? And how, perhaps, how we can lower it over the long run, assuming that we only lower it if the economy gets bigger and therefore the tax base also gets bigger, right? And you can still get that revenue to cover social services, to pay for education in the city, in public schools, and so on and so forth. So I think the question is not so much whether you want to get rid of it or not, but rather what is the appropriate level and how should that change over time as the economy hopefully gets better. So in other words, the tax base gets bigger.
Thank you so much, Mauro. Let's give Mauro a big round of applause. Thank you so much. So, I don't know who to speak to, like, look at you. It's the hybrid skill set developing here, emerging skill. Thank you, Mauro, so much.
Thank you for having me, Anne.
Yeah, best of luck at Cambridge. Keep in touch.
Thank you. And invite me again and I'll say yes, okay?
I'll see you at Fiddler Square. I know you're going to be there. Bye-bye. Yeah, Mauro, thank you so much. I hope you stay in the virtual Zoom land for the rest of the presentation. I hope everyone stays. Emily's going to transition to some slides to talk about some solutions, right? Philadelphia is facing a massive transformation, like Mauro said. I was thrilled to see his book identified as 2030 because I often talk about 2030 pre-pandemic as a really critical time where, you know, futurists and technologists were projecting that artificial intelligence would just go up on an exponential curve and really change a lot of the ways that we do things. And so when his book came out about 2030, I really was eager to get in touch with him and excited for him to speak with us, because I believe for a while now that the future is now. And in my background in the public sector, I know how slow change can come and how long the planning timelines are. So once the pandemic hit, I realized that the future is now and we do need to get to work. So thanks for sticking around for my story and these slides. The overview of Future Works Alliance. Our goals tonight are to impress upon you the problems are urgent. I think Mauro helped me with that a little bit. And to understand that we are the solution, right? There is no Superman, no president can change these things, no governor, there's no Wonder Woman coming. It's a we that needs to solve, and that you can actually help So who am I with this message, right? My name, again, is Anne Gemmell. I've been working in Philadelphia. I was born and raised here in the region. I started a career in education as a teacher. I worked at Mastery Charter School and then co-founded Education Voters, which was really the beginning of my systems thinking. The people in this room, you're probably a systems thinker because you're here. And we're a pretty rare group of folks. Most people think in a very operational direct service way. But I transitioned into economic justice when Barack Obama came onto the scene. I was very inspired to get involved politically and started working on economic justice campaigns with SEIU, and I had a presence at Fight for Philly and was involved in the Occupy movement here in Philadelphia and in DC and New York. And that led to a decriminalization effort here in Philadelphia, and then transitioned out of that after Obama was reelected in 2012. Those campaigns ended and I got involved in early childhood education, back to my roots of education, back to literacy. Very exciting campaign that was a statewide campaign, transitioned to the local Philly pre-K campaign, and entered into city government with the workforce development department, which was very disrupted by COVID. So the past 3 or 4 years, I was working as a future work specialist, and then COVID hit, and I had to make a decision. Am I going to continue this work, knowing that it's more urgent than ever before, knowing that technology is being expedited by the pandemic, or do I just go get another job? So I decided to launch FutureWorks Alliance and take all the skills that I have developed over the years with the help of many mentors and many others. I think of myself as a strategic collaboration architect, an equity designer, and a future of work pioneer. And these 3 things in all of my experience over the past 20 plus years, I won't tell the real number, is converging, I believe, for this moment. And I feel that this is very important work, and I'm very grateful that you're all here. So this presentation really needs to start with a definition of the future work. It's become a buzzword like I've never seen or watched a phrase become a buzzword over the last 4 years. And it's driven by 3 forces: the power of artificial intelligence, the speed of computing that's accelerating and changing industries. When you walk into Acme at 20 years ago, there was no self-checkout option, and now we're moving to a place of Amazon Go. This has very direct impact on our workforce. In just a few years, we have gone from over 70,000 retail cashiers in our region to just above 50,000 in a matter of years. And that 50,000 number is a pre-pandemic number. We don't know where it's going to land pre-pandemic, the number of cashiers. Their average age is 35. They have a high school diploma. They're most likely to be Black and female. What are they going to transition to? And so in the low skill area, low wage area of the workforce, you're seeing a lot of change where people are leaving cashier jobs, going to Amazon, leaving Amazon, trying Instacart, leaving Instacart, trying Uber. A lot of churn, a lot of stress, a lot of disruption. And there's 2 forces working to create talent wars and a lot of displacement. It's creating a city of haves and have-nots. People who are familiar with the city and this country, it's a trend. So this generates problems that I've noticed, and we're not unique in these problems. We lack a diverse civic space to transparently build the coordinated response. Yes, there are some people working on it, but are they in touch with the people who are affected by it? I'm not so sure. We don't have strong bridges to enable, a high school graduate of Philadelphia School District to become, a medical professional or a healthcare professional or a researcher. Why is that picture so uncommon in reality? It's because we don't have these strong bridges of, systems where someone can take a year off and pivot in their career, or 2 years to learn and transition. And we lack a community of leaders who grasp the urgency of these deep disparities and the risks of doing things like we usually do them. So I believe that the FutureWorks Alliance is the solution. I'm creating the solution. I'm iterating the solution. I'm learning this past year. Our mission is to lead diverse and methodical strategic collaborations to align stakeholders. We design and implement valuable, viable, and deeply endorsed solutions in response to this era of rapid technological change. I do not have all the answers. I'm working to crowdsource those answers using a methodology, using voices from community. And what I've learned this past year and over my career is that strategic collaboration is not only essential for responding to the future of work challenges, but it's also incredibly fragile. Strategic collaborations can fall apart very easily. You can have the wrong people involved. You can have toxic positivity. Well, what is that? That means that everyone gets in the room and agrees with each other, and they don't talk about the things and the areas where they don't agree. That's toxic positivity because it undermines focus and it undermines momentum. And what I've chosen to use with the Future Works Alliance is a tool and a methodology based on hundreds of case studies of strategic collaborations that were successful, identified the pattern of successful strategic collaborations, created a methodology and a software to align with my experience as a political organizer and a coalition builder and a change maker. This tool deeply resonated with me, although it's used primarily in the private sector right now, but all these companies have used the same methodology to solve internal problems, mergers, policies, all kinds of solutions have come out of this methodology with Shelling Point, who happens to be a founding member and is actually in the room today. So we're using this strategic collaboration and we tried it out, and I'm here to tell you that the results are really phenomenal. The process is inclusive, it's efficient, it's virtual, it's asynchronous, it protects privacy. So you don't have to worry about whether or not what you submit in the strategic dialogue is going to be, you know, upsetting your boss or upsetting your best friend. So it creates all of the essential components of a successful strategic collaboration are baked into this methodology and software. And it's a set process. With the first one that we operated, we invited hundreds of people, 78 people took us up on the first topic. The first topic was creating a communications plan about future-ready careers. I'll get into that in a minute. And I want to welcome right now, I want to publicly thank the core team, Kate Garazzo, Senna, Obereko, and Gary Fredericks. And I'm going to turn it over to Senna to talk about what it was like to donate, you know, and listen to two meetings a week for 4 weeks. This core team donated to this project significant time and energy, and she's here to talk about it today. Please welcome Senna.
Well, Anne told us in the beginning that she was going to put us to work, and as you can see, I'm standing here still working. It's just a phenomenal honor and a pleasure. With this particular project, one of the challenges was really how do we capture the voices and how do we make it all work? And there were so many benefits from serving on the core team that we hadn't anticipated in the beginning. One of those was really around leadership, right? So some key takeaways for us were the leadership skills that as a core team, we were able to practice and develop, including using that methodology and the facilitation based on the science of successful strategic collaboration, leveraging the hundreds of case studies that were informing the Shelling Point AI software, and really putting into practice inclusive leadership by providing a voice and a space for everyone's opinions to be heard, including a few charged elements where we had very different opinions, but we have to pay attention to the nuances and needs of the different populations. Also, in terms of just working with the methodology, we have very clear parameters. As you can imagine, when you're getting into some of these opportunities, you wonder, is this really going to be fruitful? Is this going to be the best use of my time? And it really was, because we had those clear parameters. Whenever we started to veer off center in terms of our focus and the needs of the communications plan, we had anchors through the software and through Anne's guidance to be able to provide us with that structure and that space. And then last but not least, the efficient decision-making. As we know, there's so many opportunities to identify the problems and generate ideas, but the real work comes in moving the work forward, rolling up your sleeves and making some really critical decisions. So we went from blue sky thinking at the beginning of the process to actually, in a couple of weeks, making some critical decisions based on the data and moving the work forward. Did that cover everything else?
Well, verse 5, you're, well, a couple more
And
slides, yeah.
good so far.
Yeah.
And then diverse points of views and empathy. We are in a space right now where if nothing else, if the past 18 months have not shown us that we have to stand in the space of empathy, we're dealing with a lot of critical issues that are not easy to separate, that have to be identified and have to be addressed. And so to be able to be in a space with the core group, to be able to put that to practice and actually see the fruits of our labor was one of the most rewarding, I think, aspects of the work with Anne. So thank you publicly on behalf of the team. And I shared this quote with Anne before, just yesterday afternoon, I believe, but this is how the work moves forward, you know, to really be able to be in a space where we have some clear guidelines, we have a clear sense of where the work may lie, we have the resources, for example, through the Showing Point software, and we have the leadership through individuals like Anne who are willing to roll up, literally roll up their sleeves, focus on the issue at hand and work on a viable solution. You know, there could be several answers, but the reality is now based on the work that Anne has put forward and working with the core team, there's a viable solution that's further along because of that commitment. Thank you, everyone.
So how are we, thank you, Sana, that was really great. I really enjoyed working with the first core team, and I wasn't even sure at the beginning of this that people would volunteer that kind of time, and I had to turn people away from the core team to make it efficient. And then the networking and the people that we've all met and the community that's being built from this is really great too. But another excellent thing that comes out of the strategic collaborations that, you know, 50, several dozen people participate in are new ideas for businesses, new ideas for programs. So outside of the scope of building a communications plan about future ready careers, all these gems and insights came in through the process that could be independent projects, could launch independently. So that's why that light bulb is there, because one of the ideas we saw come out of it is that there's a missing piece of ongoing career management that's affordable for someone like a retail cashier. And so this cycle of introducing dozens of people to problems and a methodology for solutions, and then incubating ideas and launching them with this collaborative process really creates a funnel for a higher level, higher value future of work consulting work that an alliance of experts is building, coming around this work, coming around me. I have a deep expertise in engagement and deep expertise in public policy as a translator from public sector to private sector interests. So I have the consulting, but there's also amazing consultants that have come into this project that are creating a community of entrepreneurs. I mentioned a little bit about this, the strategic collaboration, the public strategic collaboration show a whole, group, a cohort of people who are juiced about a particular topic, but then get to see how the most effective way to solve problems and work together is. They could then look into the higher value strategic consulting. You could do more authentic engagement inside of an organization with this methodology. And of course, some expertise that several of the founders have in this group is the translation from public to private sector. And all of the research, World Economic Forum, McKinsey, Deloitte, you name it, they're all saying the same thing, that in order for a metro area to become more resilient to the rapid changes ahead, we need to collaborate. But that's hard. But now we have a way to do it, and we're building a community to drive it. The working team is awesome. Like, the people that have come to this project and supported this work have deep expertise. They are mission-driven people. They have diverse viewpoints. They're in the room. Precious Samuels from Samuels Consulting. Ballard Spar's not here. On Point Partners is in Zoom land. Orly Ziwi Branding is here in the room. Becca Reffert does web management. Michelle Atherton, she's not on there yet. She's a researcher, come on board. Allison from Slicer Media is here, and Shelling Point, George and Tracy are here. So the team, and there's more people that have just chipped in, Tech Impact Impact was the fiscal sponsor early on, true team effort. Over the past 8 months, I've had the honor of recruiting advisors that will answer my call and will talk to me for an hour or more. They come from the public sector, many of whom also have experience in politics or the private sector or workforce development. Ashley Putnam's in the room. So we have the institutional leaders and experienced public sector folks. We have the technology pros in big data and automation, RPA pros who really just feel such a sense of urgency about the change ahead because they know more than the rest of us about the capacity of the technology. Tracy Wilson-Rossman from Charity Solutions and Madeline Bayless in her second act from IBM also worked in the one foot private sector, 1 foot public sector. We have Malik Brown and Chad Womack from higher education perspective and also national networks and direct service, 1 foot in national networks, 1 foot in direct. And there's more people on the advisory board. I have 15 advisors. I've recruited 58 founders who have contributed dollars or significant in-kind expertise and support to the project. So I'm thrilled to have these supporters and more supporters. And I'm very proud of the diversity that, that has come to this project. Next slide. So what do? We inform, we gather, we engage, we train and consult. And a lot of people do little bits of these things, but nobody's doing them all in a sequence with a methodology, with a laser focus on specific challenges that the future of work is going to deliver to our doorstep faster than we can imagine. We combine PhD expertise with PhDs. Harjeet from the slide before called me a PhD, and I said, "Wow, what do you mean?" He's like, "You know," and I just thought that was an amazing compliment. And no shade to PhDs, we love our PhDs too, but we combine that research with the implementation. Equitable, diverse approach. Anyone can participate in a public strategic collaboration. And then we're building a community of advanced consultants with a breadth of experience in a number of areas. We've had some milestones. I've published 10 columns about future-proofing. We had Congresswoman Lisa Blunt Rochester, who's the chair of Future of Work in Congress, anchor our first event ever. We really had no money in the bank. We weren't an official C3, but she loved the concept and helped us with that first event. She was amazing. We launched and completed our first open collaboration, the public strategic collaboration. We launched our .tech training series, which we had an earlier one to kind of educate the public about the tech training options. We have our keynote tonight, this event here. Thank you for coming. And we also secured our first consulting contract with the state of PA to create a 5-year future of worker strategy for the governor's administration. I'm also very cognizant of the startup, like what is the experience? How will the public or a leader experience this? We'll go from seeing or hearing about the work to participating at an event or signing up for a strategic collaboration, thinking about contributing to the innovation, perhaps considering consulting for purchasing our consulting for their organizations. And then next slide. Thank you. How are we going to pay for this is always a question. I know that philanthropy has changed. Even though we're a C3, there's very few nonprofits that can exist just from perpetual foundation support. And so it's important to me to be self-sustaining, but we will have a mix of large and small donors, sponsorships for the public strategic collaborations on the front end, and grants for strategic collaborations that have results. Which, by the way, there's a flyer here. You can do the QR code and read the document that we have created from that first strategic collaboration. It's a 3-part document that lives on our website. Just check out on the QR code. And then consulting contracts that we pull in through this process, I'm hoping will sustain a rather lean budget. We've already raised over $100,000. and small donors who feel an urgency and a sense that this is important work and they want to support it, and contracts and people who recognize the expertise of the Future Works Alliance. And we have a goal of a year 2 operating budget of $250,000. We're not far from that goal, and that would sustain, you know, legitimate compensation for the many people involved in this work. They are experts, and it's a core value of mine, obviously, to compensate people for the work that they do. So that's our goal there. As you can see, not a lot of fat. The plans ahead are in 3 priorities. 1, we want to take that strategic collaboration about the Future Ready communications plan into operation, because if we let journalism or web news dominate the narrative about the future work, we will never stop reading news about robots taking jobs and automation eliminating any opportunity. That is simply not the case. We are going to have jobs that get eliminated, but there's going to be opportunities created. But that's not a part of the narrative, and that's why it's a top priority to operate that communications plan directly to Philadelphians through trusted messengers, using the plan that we've created, the valuable, viable, like widely endorsed plan, putting it into action. So that's a top priority. Launching the 2nd strategic collaboration. If you're a founder, or an advisory, you will weigh in on which one we will do next. My work and thinking on this is organized in 4 pillars. Innovation pillar, to create more resilience for our region, education, talent, and environment. The environmental pillar, we really have no regional strategy to protect our main streets and commercial corridors from e-commerce. E-commerce is inevitable. What is our response going to be? Because brick and mortar pedestrian life is core to this region, small towns throughout Pennsylvania and all of our commercial corridors in the city. We cannot have vacant stores up and down our communities. We need to build a strategy. As Mauro said, and I did not know he was going to say that, we do need a strategy to grow homegrown talent and attract the work from anywhere workers, people that can go anywhere, work from anywhere. We want them to live here because this region is awesome. Education pillar, gender and racial equity and STEAM. You know, there's a lot of work that needs to be done from the middle school level up to the college level to make sure there's greater expanded opportunity in the innovation industries, aka STEAM. And the 3rd priority is building Future Works Alliance so that it's more robust. You know, building up Future Works Alliance as we do the work, building the plane as we fly the plane, so to speak. Next slide. So what I'm asking the people who are listening today, the people in the room, is for you to be one of the 76 founders. Once we get to 76, that's it. You are the 76 most innovative people in this area, and you will forever be known as the one of the 76 that contributed in a way to make this live. This is the range of donations that we're looking for. Of course, I'm not going to stop raising money when we get to 76 founders. There's a lot of imagination here about work that we can do and a vision for expansion. But you know, we need to get to 76 founders, and we need to raise $250,000 total. And there's real benefits to being a founder. You get to meet the amazing people that are also innovators, who get the urgency, who understand the intersection of technology and work and life. You'll get to weigh in on designing and building the future of work playbook for Philadelphia. You'll have promotional opportunities with our great web and social media PR team. You know, all of the events that we do and other opportunities for promoting what you do. And again, as I mentioned, you'll always be a part and known as that high impact innovator community. And lastly, the future is now, and we do need to get to work. I've had a career where I've had moments of go big or go home, and this is a go big or go home moment, and I hope you'll go big with me. I'm happy to take any questions. I know that was a lot, and you know, we had a time constraint. We just hit the mark on time, but we do have time for questions, right? Okay, great. So if there's any questions from the chat or any questions from the room, I'm happy to open up the floor. Yes, sir.
I'll try.
Okay.
And again, it's Jim Burnett with Vested, and I'm curious have you engaged smaller businesses? And also from a corporate standpoint, is the Chamber of Commerce some way built into this engagement and where do they flow? But more importantly, smaller businesses who they may only need 1 or 2 jobs, but in commercial corridors, as you mentioned, that could be a huge boost for this business.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. You mean engage small businesses to be involved in as founders? Is that your question?
I'm not more concerned about the founders as I am with the outcomes of the employment.
Yes, yes. Very good question. So as you know, we've seen signing bonuses and a real stratification in the workforce post-pandemic, where Wawa has now raised their minimum and they're doing signing bonuses. And that makes it more difficult for small business to access talent for sure. But my larger concern around small business for the city and commercial corridors is just the ability to compete, period, in the marketplace, let alone for talent. So that's why I believe we need a commercial corridor to support businesses, to help them implement technology that can help them. There's now so much movement in artificial intelligence that you can do plug and play with a lot of tools that small businesses may or may not be aware of. So I think that one of the things that has been discussed in some of the Works Alliance discussions is, what do we do to support small, medium-sized businesses so they can keep up with the massive AI power that Target or McDonald's or Walmart is leveraging right now, and the level of service they can almost anticipate the needs. So how do you adjust the marketing? So those conversations are absolutely the Future Works Alliance would welcome that conversation along with the Commerce Department and the Chamber. We're not excluding anyone. This is an open table. To answer your question, the Chamber of Commerce and city government, large institutions are aware of this. They were involved in the Future of Work coalition and work that was happening in 2019 pre-pandemic. But a lot of institutions have been so overwhelmed in just dealing with their own bottom line. I feel like this year is really the year where large institutions will have the breathing room to engage with this work, and it's ready. It's ready now. It's ready to roll. Any questions? Any other questions? Yeah, Madeline, here you go. Okay, there you go.
I just want to piggyback on the conversation, because the one thing that I have discovered, I joined as founding member and served additionally in other capacities because of the passion I have about the impact of technology. And one of the things that I think is a leverage point to your question is the alliance concept itself. So that by bringing together real diversity of some, everything in mosaic, and by interacting together in the collaborative way that allows for that openness, a lot of the way to the end results is what kind of partnerships. Even the big guys and gals don't get big on their own. It's because Amazon already had a transportation system in the States, right? They're already were e-commerce things. So even the large institutions benefit from these concepts. So, and having been involved in AI, the issue of scale is a critical component. So every time we can find a way to break away that advantage and still give the benefit of whatever it is, the AI, the education, whatever, and make it accessible. And we're going to find those ways by collaborating, by leveraging on each other's advantages. Because there are advantages that entrepreneurs, immigrants, individual businesses bring to the table. Every industry brings to the table. And we just have to get that to add up to more than the sum of parts.
Yeah, and I would also add, when we look to operate the communications program, we're gonna prioritize small, medium-sized, minority and women-owned businesses. We have a great community of independent skilled contractors and small businesses. And most of the businesses in Philadelphia are what we call mice, right? They're not elephants, they're mice. And there's a lot of talent and skill, and the Works Alliance is intent on prioritizing them when we need videographer or photographer, or, and there's a community here, Rec Philly, that is pre-organizing those professionals for a communications plan like that. And these topics that we're going to tackle, they're going to generate plans that need to be operationalized. And when we operationalize them, there'll be opportunities, I believe, for small businesses to get involved with the solutions. There's no action on the chat, no Zoom land. Zoom land's quiet, so that's okay. If anyone has any questions after the presentation, I'd be happy to stick around a little bit. I want to thank you all for being here today and supporting this work, and I urge you to please become one of the 76 founders, because you're here in this room. You're already a natural fit because you are here. So thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you soon. Thanks so much.